Good afternoon, everyone. This is just a quick update on a couple of things going on in the Parliament. I've been flat out busy, like most of our team, on the surrogacy bill all week. But one of the things that we've been anticipating as a big deal is this, which is the report on the 2024 firearms legislation. Now it's called Report 51. It's really just called Standing Committee on Legislation, Firearms Act 2024. It's quite a huge document. It is about 200 and something odd pages, 240 pages, with many, many recommendations and findings, most of which are what we expected and not particularly satisfying. Some pretty disturbing ones in there. The things that really struck me were that the committee had found no issue with things like the regulations itself. It said the Firearms Regulations 2024 were sufficiently subject to the scrutiny of Parliament, which is just not true. The Act itself was bad enough. It was 11 clauses out of 295 or 296 were reviewed before they shut off debate. And then the regulations themselves, we really don't get a chance to look at that. We can have a look at it, but it's not reviewed in the Parliament. So it's really up to individual members and up to members of the public to try and get their head around it. Other things that were really quite disturbing were this is the report, but the Act itself is full of Henry VIII type clauses, which means that the Parliament has given the executive, in this case the Commissioner, some pretty extensive powers. And these were, the report goes into those. It says things, the wording's interesting. I'll try to get to it without spending too much time. About how it describes those Henry VIII powers. So it says, for example, finding 5, the definition of a disqualifying order in Section 5 of the Firearms Act 2024 has a Henry VIII effect. It therefore offends against fundamental legislative principle 14. However, a regulation-making power to prescribe new disqualifying orders is justified to enable efficient action to protect public safety. And this applies for things like these disqualifying orders, disqualification offences, and there's a number of other ones in there as well. So they all violate that principle 14, the legislative principle 14, which is really about the Parliament essentially handing over the powers of the Parliament to the executive. The Police Commissioner, when questioned on this, and I don't believe it's an answer that the Police Commissioner should really be giving, is that it future-proofs the bill and makes it possible to deal with any changes in departments change. You get new departments, you get new requirements for regulations, new categories of people, new categories of firearms might come in. And so instead of going back to the Parliament, then the Commissioner can just go and come up with a new regulation, and there you go, you've just created something. The only way that the Parliament can potentially do anything about that is by what is known as a disallowance motion. And we've tried that with the regulations before, and that's entirely dependent on who controls the numbers in the Legislative Council for disallowances anyway. So there's no guarantee that abuses of power will not continue to be abused if the government has the numbers in the upper house, or the government and the crossbench, in this case it was the Greens, agree with them. So if there's abuses of power, the Parliament's actually quite limited in what it can do. So the Act itself, in my view, needs to be significantly amended, and I'll be working on that a lot more in the next it's going to take a couple of years. There's some principles in there that I'm seeing come through other pieces of legislation where these Henry VIII powers, and it's usually under the guise of we're future-proofing the bill just in case, and it's used to streamline things. But once you get that, I think it's almost like a taste for this type of power in the bureaucracy and the executive and government, it becomes very difficult to unwind those, and I think it becomes very difficult to wean yourself off them, really, until you get to a point that there is a gross breach, and then something has to be done by the Parliament, and you really get pushback. And this happened back in, I think it was 1539, when Henry VIII actually brought in his statute of proclamations in 1539, and then a few years later it was actually repealed because of the abuses of power that were used within it. And as I've said in other forums, that Henry VIII's powers over time they tried to come back. They come back in various forms. They are sometimes useful, but need to be constrained and need to be very carefully used. It's only in recent decades, really, they've started to become fairly heavily used in legislation, and in particular in Western Australia, because of the makeup of the government and the fact that we had effectively a one-party state. A lot of those powers have been granted over to the executive and to the government itself, and there's been no way of really stopping them and putting scrutiny on them. So that's sort of what I'm here for. We've got to try and get our heads around. It's been a very, very busy week on other things. So, interested to hear your feedback. Send me emails.